The woman in the tailored suit looked me up and down, her smile freezing mid-gesture. She didn't say anything at first, but her eyes spoke volumes. That's when I knew this night wasn't going to be easy. I stood in the grand lobby of the Rosewood Hotel in Manhattan, clutching my invitation like it was a passport to another world. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting warm light on marble floors so polished I could see my reflection. Around me, guests in designer gowns and sharp tuxedos floated past, their laughter echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, a heady mixture that made everything feel surreal. I adjusted the hem of my black dress, the one I'd spent weeks finding, the one that made me feel beautiful when I looked in the mirror at home. It had taken visits to 7 different stores before I found something that fit properly and made me feel like I could walk into a room full of industry elite without apologizing for my existence. The fabric was quality, the cut flattering, and when I'd tried it on in my apartment that afternoon, my best friend Maya had literally gasped and said I looked like I could run the entire event, not just attend it. But here, under these lights and these stairs, I felt like an imposter. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm a Senior Acquisitions Director at Hartwell Media Group, one of the largest publishing conglomerates in North America. Tonight was the annual Industry Innovation Gala, where media executives, celebrated authors, and entertainment moguls gathered to network, celebrate achievements, and make deals that would shape the cultural landscape for years to come. This wasn't just another corporate dinner. This was the event where careers were made, where million-dollar deals were sealed with handshakes, where the future of entertainment and media was quietly negotiated over champagne and canapes. I'd earned my invitation. 15 years of climbing corporate ladders, negotiating million-dollar contracts, and discovering voices that became bestsellers had brought me here. My track record spoke for itself. 3 New York Times bestsellers in the past 2 years alone, including a debut novel that had spent 18 weeks at #1 and was currently being adapted into a major streaming series. I'd built relationships with literary agents across the country, developed an instinct for spotting commercial potential in manuscripts that others had rejected, and created a reputation as someone who took risks on unconventional stories that somehow always seemed to pay off. Yet as I approached the registration desk, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being measured by a different metric entirely. The woman at the desk, whose nameplate read Clarissa, scanned her tablet with perfectly manicured nails. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her navy dress probably cost more than my monthly rent. Everything about her screamed old money and effortless elegance, the kind of polish that comes from growing up in country clubs and attending private schools where connections mattered more than credentials. "Name?" she asked without looking up, her tone suggesting this was the 100th check-in she'd processed tonight, and her patience was wearing thin. "Sarah Mitchell, Hartwell Media Group." Her fingers paused on the screen. She glanced up, her gaze traveling from my face down to my body and back again, lingering just long enough to make her assessment clear. The pause lasted only a second, but it felt like an eternity. I'd seen that look before, countless times throughout my career. It was the look that said, "You're not what I expected. You don't look like you belong here." "Oh," she said, her tone shifting to something I couldn't quite place. Surprise? Doubt? Barely concealed disdain? Let me just verify that. I watched her scroll through her tablet, her brow furrowing slightly as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. Behind me, other guests moved through the line effortlessly, their credentials accepted without question. A man in an Armani tuxedo simply stated his name and was waved through with a warm smile. An impossibly thin woman in a couture gown was greeted like an old friend, Clarissa's entire demeanor transforming into animated enthusiasm. "Is there a problem?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. No problem, it's just..." She looked up again, this time with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. The kind of smile people use when they're trying to be polite but can't quite hide their true feelings. We had someone else listed under that company. But yes, here you are. Sarah Mitchell. She handed me a name badge and a program, her movements just slightly brusque. "Enjoy your evening." The dismissal was clear. I took my materials and moved toward the main ballroom, my heart pounding harder than it should have been. This wasn't my first high-profile event. I'd attended industry conferences, award ceremonies, and exclusive publisher dinners. But something about tonight felt different. Maybe it was the way Clarissa had looked at me, like I was a problem that needed solving rather than a guest who deserved to be there. Maybe it was the whispers I'd noticed when I walked past a cluster of women near the coat check, their conversations stopping mid-sentence as they turned to watch me pass. Or maybe it was the fact that in a room full of hundreds of people, I could count on one hand how many looked like me. The ballroom was breathtaking in a way that made my breath catch in my throat. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, now dark except for scattered streetlights that twinkled like fallen stars against the velvet sky. Round tables draped in white linen filled the space, each centerpiece a carefully arranged bouquet of white roses and orchids that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. A string quartet played softly in one corner, their music weaving through conversation like an elegant thread. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres, moving with practiced efficiency through the crowd. The room hummed with energy, the particular kind that comes from putting powerful people in close proximity. I recognized faces from business magazines and industry publications. There was Marcus Chen, the tech mogul whose keynote speech everyone was anticipating. At a nearby table, I spotted Janet Reynolds, the legendary literary agent who'd represented 3 Pulitzer Prize winners. Near the bar, a cluster of Hollywood executives were deep in conversation, probably negotiating their next big adaptation. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and found my assigned table near the center of the room. Table 12. My place card sat between 2 empty chairs, the thick cardstock embossed with gold lettering. I was early, which gave me time to collect myself before making conversation. I needed a moment to breathe, to remind myself that I'd earned this seat, that my accomplishments spoke for themselves regardless of how I looked or what assumptions people made about me. As I settled into my seat, arranging my small clutch and program on the table, I noticed a group of women at the next table glancing in my direction. They were the kind of women magazines featured in their Power Players issues. Rail-thin, expensively dressed, dripping in jewelry that caught the light with every movement. Each one looked like they'd stepped off a runway, their hair and makeup flawless, their postures perfect. They had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove you belong somewhere, from knowing that doors would always open for you, that your presence would always be welcomed. One of them, a redhead in an emerald dress that probably cost more than my car payment, leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her hand. They both looked at me, their expressions shifting from casual interest to something sharper, more critical. The companion, a brunette with diamond earrings that caught the light with every movement, covered her mouth as she laughed, a gesture that was meant to seem polite, but only emphasized the cruelty of whatever had just been said. I pretended not to notice, focusing on the program in my hands with intense concentration. Tonight's agenda included a keynote speech from Marcus Chen, CEO of Digital Horizon Networks, followed by the presentation of the Visionary Leadership Awards. My company had 3 nominations, though I wasn't expecting to be called to the stage. I was here to represent Hartwell, to network, to be seen as part of the team, to prove, once again, that I belonged in rooms like this one. The program detailed each award category, the nominees, and brief bios of the evening's speakers. I read through it mechanically, the words barely registering as my awareness remained tuned to the table beside me. I could hear fragments of their conversation now, carefully modulated voices that carried just far enough to reach my ears. I didn't realize the standards had changed so much, one of them said, the words dripping with implication. Well, you know how it is these days. Everyone has to be so inclusive, another responded, the word inclusive pronounced with barely disguised contempt. My stomach clenched, but I kept my eyes on the program, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing they'd gotten to me. This wasn't new. I'd faced this kind of subtle hostility throughout my career, the whispered comments and loaded glances, the assumption that I didn't deserve to be where I was, that my success must be due to luck or quotas rather than talent and hard work. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up, grateful for the interruption, to find a man in his 60s standing beside the empty chair next to mine. He was silver-haired and distinguished in a classic black tuxedo, his face kind and open. His smile was genuine, reaching the crinkles around his eyes in a way that suggested a life spent laughing and finding joy in his work. "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the chair beside me with genuine warmth. He sat down with a satisfied sigh, adjusting his bow tie slightly. "Robert Harrison, Harrison Literary Agency. And you are?" "Sarah Mitchell, Hartwell Media Group." His eyes lit up with recognition, and I felt some of the tension in my shoulders ease. "Sarah Mitchell, I've heard wonderful things about your work. Didn't you acquire the Chapman trilogy last year? That was a brilliant move, absolutely brilliant." Warmth spread through my chest, pushing back against the cold discomfort that had been building since I walked into the lobby. "I did. Thank you. It's been incredible watching those books connect with readers." "Incredible instincts," he said, shaking his head admiringly. "That's what this industry needs more of. People who understand storytelling, not just market trends. Too many editors these days are chasing whatever sold last year instead of looking for what readers don't even know they want yet. You clearly have a gift for seeing potential where others don't." We fell into easy conversation about recent acquisitions and upcoming projects. Robert was gracious and knowledgeable, the kind of person who made networking feel like friendship rather than work. He asked thoughtful questions about my editorial philosophy and shared stories from his decades in the industry, painting a picture of how much publishing had changed and how much had stayed the same. As we talked, I felt myself relaxing, remembering why I loved this work, why I'd fought so hard to build a career in an industry that didn't always welcome people like me. Other guests began filling the tables around us. A woman in her 40s with short dark hair and a striking red dress approached our table, checking her place card before sitting across from us. She introduced herself as Patricia Vance, head of publicity for Meridian House Publishers, and immediately jumped into conversation about a recent campaign that had gone viral. Soon our table was full, and the conversation flowed naturally between industry talk and personal anecdotes, the kind of comfortable professional banter that happens when people who share a passion for their work come together. But I couldn't shake the awareness of being watched. The redhead from the next table stood and walked past ours on her way to the bar, her emerald dress swishing dramatically with each step. As she passed, I heard her say to her companion, just loud enough to be intentional, just loud enough to ensure I would hear. I didn't realize they were letting just anyone in this year. The words hit like a physical blow. My stomach tightened, my face growing hot. Patricia, mid-sentence about a book launch, faltered slightly, her eyes flickering to me with a look of concern and anger. Robert's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. They'd heard it too. The comment hadn't been subtle or ambiguous. It had been deliberate and cruel, designed to make me feel small, to remind me that some people would always see me as an interloper rather than a colleague. I took a sip of water, forcing myself to remain composed, to keep my hand steady as I set the glass back down. This wasn't the first time I'd encountered bias, and it wouldn't be the last. In boardrooms and at conferences, in meetings with authors and negotiations with agents, I'd learned to let my work speak for itself, to rise above the comments and the stares. I'd learned to smile through the condescension, to prove my worth through results rather than arguments. But tonight, something felt particularly pointed. Maybe it was the luxury of the setting, the reminder that no matter how successful I became, there would always be people who saw my body before they saw my accomplishments. Maybe it was the cumulative weight of 15 years of fighting these same battles. Or maybe it was simply exhaustion, the weariness that comes from constantly having to prove your right to occupy space. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'd absolutely love to know how far this story reaches around the world. As dinner was served, beautifully plated courses of roasted chicken with seasonal vegetables and herb-crusted potatoes, the MC took the stage to welcome everyone. The room quieted gradually, conversations tapering off as attention shifted to the front. I ate mechanically, the food tasteless in my mouth, despite what I'm sure was excellent preparation. My stomach was too tight with anxiety to properly appreciate the meal. I was hyper-aware of every glance and whisper around me, my senses heightened by discomfort and the growing certainty that this evening was about to become more challenging than I'd anticipated. The MC, a popular morning show host named David Lawrence, launched into his opening remarks with practiced charm. He made jokes about the industry, referenced recent bestsellers, and warmly welcomed the assembled guests. His energy was infectious, and the room responded with laughter and applause at all the right moments. I tried to focus on his words, to lose myself in the program and forget about the women at the next table. But during the keynote speech, as Marcus Chen talked about innovation and disruption in media, I noticed the brunette with the diamond earrings lean toward the redhead again. They were still at the next table, still watching. The brunette's lips moved in a whisper, and the redhead nodded, her expression one of amused agreement. Then they both turned to look at me, not even bothering to hide their scrutiny. I forced myself to focus on Marcus Chen's words about courage in business and the importance of taking risks on unconventional ideas. He spoke passionately about how the future belonged to companies willing to challenge assumptions and embrace change. His speech was inspiring, full of concrete examples of how betting against conventional wisdom had led to breakthrough success. Under different circumstances, I would have been completely engaged, taking mental notes and thinking about how to apply his insights to my work. But inside, a familiar question echoed louder than his eloquent words. Would I ever walk into a room and simply be seen for what I'd accomplished, rather than how I looked? The applause for Marcus Chen's speech was enthusiastic and sustained. He delivered exactly what this crowd wanted: a combination of inspiration and practical wisdom wrapped in charismatic delivery. As it faded, dessert was served, a delicate chocolate mousse with raspberry coulis, artfully presented with a dusting of cocoa powder and a single mint leaf. I pushed mine around with my spoon, creating abstract patterns in the smooth surface, my appetite completely gone. The richness of the chocolate seemed cloying rather than appealing. The energy at my table remained warm throughout dinner. Robert was telling Patricia about a memoir he'd just signed, a powerful story from a war correspondent who'd covered conflicts in the Middle East for 20 years. His enthusiasm was genuine, and Patricia responded with questions about marketing angles and publicity opportunities. Others at our table joined in, and soon we were deep in discussion about the memoir market and reader appetite for international stories. I participated when questions were directed at me, offering thoughts on acquisition strategy and reader trends, but I couldn't fully engage. The whispers from the next table had continued throughout dinner, not constantly, but enough to create a steady undercurrent of discomfort. Every few minutes, I'd catch one of them glancing over, followed by a knowing look exchanged between them. Another whispered comment behind raised hands. It was like being back in middle school, overhearing cruel gossip and knowing you were the subject, but being powerless to confront it without seeming paranoid or oversensitive. "Sarah, what do you think?" I blinked, realizing Robert had asked me a question and was waiting for my response. The entire table was looking at me expectantly. I felt my face flush with embarrassment at being caught not paying attention. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I asked, hoping my distraction wasn't too obvious. "The shift toward audio content," Robert repeated patiently, his expression kind rather than annoyed. "Do you see it affecting traditional publishing in the next 5 years?" I gathered my thoughts, grateful for something concrete to focus on, something that had nothing to do with the judgment emanating from the table beside us. This was familiar territory, a topic I'd spent considerable time researching and thinking about. "Absolutely," I said, my voice gaining confidence as I settled into professional analysis. "We're already seeing audio-first deals become more common. Just last month, we signed a thriller author who conceived the entire series with audio in mind, structuring the narrative to take advantage of what voice performance can add. But I think the key is understanding that different formats serve different purposes. Audio doesn't replace reading. It expands the audience. There are people who consume stories while commuting, exercising, or doing household tasks. People who might not have time to sit down with a physical book, but can listen for hours. We're not cannibalizing the market, we're growing it." Patricia nodded enthusiastically, clearly pleased to have someone validate her own thinking. Exactly. We just partnered with a podcast network to create companion audio content for one of our thriller series. The engagement has been phenomenal. Readers are listening to behind-the-scenes discussions with the author, then going back to reread passages with new context. It's created this wonderful feedback loop that's actually boosting print sales, not reducing them. Another person at our table, a young editor named Marcus, who worked for an independent press, jumped in with thoughts about accessibility. And we can't ignore how audio opens up books to people with visual impairments or reading difficulties. There's a social good element here that goes beyond market expansion. The conversation flowed naturally from there, discussing the evolving landscape of media consumption, debating whether traditional book covers still mattered in an audio-first world, and sharing stories of surprising successes in different formats. As we talked, I felt myself settling back into my professional identity, remembering that I was good at this, that I had valuable insights to contribute regardless of what anyone at the next table thought about my appearance. But then the MC returned to the stage, and the energy in the room shifted again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the awards portion of our evening. First, I'd like to present the Innovation in Digital Media Award. The room erupted in polite applause as the first recipient, a woman in her 30s who'd developed a groundbreaking e-book platform, walked to the stage. I clapped along, watching as she accepted her crystal trophy and delivered a brief speech thanking her team and investors. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself genuinely happy for her success, even through my own anxiety about the evening. More awards followed, each one celebrating different aspects of media innovation. An editor who'd pioneered interactive fiction, a marketing executive who'd developed new social media strategies for book launches, a publisher who'd successfully transitioned their entire catalog to sustainable printing practices. Each acceptance speech followed a familiar pattern: gratitude, humility, acknowledgement of team efforts, a joke or two that landed well with the industry insider audience. Next, the MC announced, checking his notes with deliberate dramatic pause, we have the Visionary Leadership Award. This honor recognizes an individual who has demonstrated exceptional foresight and courage in shaping the future of media and entertainment. My attention sharpened despite myself. This was one of the most prestigious awards of the evening, often a career-defining moment for the recipient. Past winners included people who'd gone on to lead major media companies or launch transformative new ventures. It was the kind of recognition that opened doors and validated decades of work. This year's recipient has been instrumental in diversifying the voices we hear and the stories we tell, the MC continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Through strategic acquisitions and a deep understanding of cultural shifts, this individual has brought numerous groundbreaking works to mainstream audiences. Works that might have remained in obscurity have instead become cultural touchstones, starting conversations and changing perspectives. I felt Robert shift beside me, his attention fully on the stage. Around the room, people were leaning forward slightly, curious about who would be recognized. In the past 3 years alone, this person has acquired 17 debut novels, 12 of which became bestsellers. More importantly, these books represented voices and perspectives that had been systematically excluded from mainstream publishing. Indigenous authors, disabled writers, immigrant storytellers, LGBTQ+ voices. Each acquisition was a risk, each one defied conventional market wisdom, and each one proved that readers were hungry for authentic, diverse stories. My heart began to pound, a strange mixture of hope and disbelief rising in my chest. Could they be talking about me? I'd never submitted myself for this award. Nominations came from industry peers, not self-promotion. Please join me in congratulating Sarah Mitchell of Hartwell Media Group. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The applause seemed distant, like I was underwater, the sound muffled and strange. My name. He'd said my name. Out of everyone in this room, all the accomplished executives and celebrated publishers, they'd chosen me. Robert touched my arm gently, his smile wide and genuine. Sarah, that's you. Go on. I stood on trembling legs, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought everyone could surely hear it. My hands were shaking, and I clutched my small evening bag to keep them steady. As I stepped away from the table, I saw Patricia beaming at me, her hands clasped together in delight, her eyes actually glistening with tears. Around the room, people I'd never met were clapping, some standing in acknowledgement, their faces reflecting genuine appreciation and respect. But my eyes landed on the next table, and what I saw there made my steps falter for just a moment. The redhead and the brunette sat frozen, their expressions shifting from shock to something darker. The redhead's mouth hung slightly open, her champagne glass suspended halfway to her lips, forgotten. The brunette's face had flushed an angry red, her jaw clenched tight, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Around them, their companions looked between me and them, the tension palpable even from several feet away. Some of them looked embarrassed, others confused, clearly picking up on an undercurrent they didn't fully understand. I straightened my shoulders and continued walking toward the stage, my dress swishing around my legs, each step more confident than the last. The applause grew louder, more enthusiastic. People I recognized from industry events were smiling at me, nodding their approval. At a table near the front, I saw Margaret Hartwell herself, the chair of my company's board, standing and clapping with obvious pride. The walk to the stage felt both endless and too short. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, what this meant. The MC met me with a warm handshake and a crystal award shaped like a rising sun, its facets catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns across the stage. The weight of it felt real, substantial, grounding me in the moment. "Congratulations, Sarah," he said warmly, his microphone off so only I could hear. "Your work has inspired a lot of people in this room. Would you like to say a few words?" I nodded, not trusting my voice yet. He stepped back, and I turned to face the audience, hundreds of faces looking back at me. In the front row, I recognized some of the industry's most powerful figures. CEOs of major publishing houses, presidents of literary agencies, award-winning authors whose books had shaped culture. Further back, I saw younger professionals, assistants, and junior editors, perhaps hoping to one day stand where I stood, perhaps seeing in me proof that it was possible. What do you think Sarah should say in her speech? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I took a breath, deeper than I'd intended, and stepped closer to the microphone. My hands were still shaking, so I placed the award carefully on the podium in front of me, using the moment to compose myself. The crystal caught the stage lights, sending sparkles across the polished wood surface. When I looked up, the sea of faces seemed less intimidating somehow. These were my peers, people who understood the work, the passion, the challenges of this industry. "Thank you," I began, my voice steadier than I expected, amplified by the excellent sound system. I have to admit, I didn't prepare a speech because I genuinely didn't think I'd be standing here tonight. A ripple of understanding laughter moved through the audience, warm and knowing. Several people nodded, recognizing the humility or perhaps the genuine surprise in my admission. When I started in this industry 15 years ago, fresh out of college with a literature degree and more passion than practical skills, I was told repeatedly that I didn't have the right look for the job. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others leaned forward, sensing this would be more than a typical acceptance speech. That I should consider behind-the-scenes roles instead of client-facing positions. That readers wouldn't take me seriously as a representative of literature and culture. One hiring manager actually told me I should think about a career in library science instead, somewhere I wouldn't have to be seen. The room had gone completely quiet. Even the waiters had stopped moving, standing still against the walls. I could feel the weight of attention shift, people leaning forward slightly in their seats, the polite interest transforming into genuine engagement. But I fell in love with stories when I was 8 years old, reading under the covers with a flashlight long after bedtime. My parents thought I was sleeping, but I was actually traveling to Narnia, solving mysteries with Harriet the Spy, learning about friendship from Charlotte's Web. A few people smiled, recognizing their own childhood in my words. Stories taught me that the world was bigger than what I could see from my small town in Ohio. They taught me empathy, courage, and the power of perspective. They showed me people and places and possibilities I never would have encountered otherwise. And I knew, even as a kid hiding under those covers, that I wanted to spend my life finding those stories and sharing them with others. I paused, taking a sip of water from the glass someone had thoughtfully placed on the podium. My eyes drifted to the table where the redhead and brunette sat. They were no longer whispering. The redhead stared down at her dessert plate, her face pale, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. The brunette's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping in her cheek, her hands folded in her lap in what looked like a death grip. This award isn't just about the books I've acquired or the deals I've negotiated, I continued, my voice growing stronger. It's about the stories we choose to tell and the voices we choose to amplify. For too long, entire communities have been left out of mainstream narratives. Their experiences have been deemed too niche, too risky, not commercial enough. Publishers said readers wouldn't connect with certain characters or certain stories. But what I've learned, what the past 3 years have proven beyond any doubt, is that there is no such thing as a niche story. There are only stories we haven't been brave enough to share. More nods now, particularly from younger attendees scattered throughout the room. I saw one young woman, probably in her mid-20s, wiping her eyes discreetly. An older man in the front row was nodding vigorously, his expression one of vindication. The Chapman trilogy that Mr. Harrison mentioned earlier, that series about a biracial woman navigating identity and belonging in corporate America? I gestured toward Robert, who raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement. That was rejected by 11 publishers before it came to my desk. 11. They said the protagonist was too complex, too angry, that readers wouldn't connect with her struggles. They said her voice was too authentic, which I think was code for too black, too female, too real. But I saw something different. I saw a character who reflected the reality of millions of people who'd never seen themselves as the hero of a story before. I saw truth and power and the kind of storytelling that changes how people see the world. The applause started softly and built quickly, people unable to wait for the end of the speech to show their approval. I waited for it to quiet, using the moment to gather my thoughts for what I wanted to say next. And when we published it, those readers showed up. They bought the books in hardcover, in paperback, in audio. They shared them on social media. They pressed them into their friends' hands. They wrote reviews talking about how seen they felt. They made those books bestsellers not because of our marketing budget or our publicity campaign, but because they were hungry for representation. Because they'd been waiting their entire lives to see themselves as the protagonist, as the hero, as someone whose story mattered. More applause, genuine and sustained. At my table, Patricia was crying openly now, not bothering to hide it. Robert was clapping with his hands raised high, his expression one of fierce pride. Even people at other tables who I didn't know were standing, the gesture rippling outward through the room. So tonight, I accept this award on behalf of every person who's been told they don't belong in a room like this. My voice caught slightly, emotion threatening to overwhelm me. I pushed through it. Every person who's been judged before they've spoken. Every person who's had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. Every person who's walked into a space and immediately felt the weight of assumptions about who they are and what they're capable of based on nothing more than how they look. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the entire room, making sure everyone understood I was talking to them, about them, for them. You belong. Your perspective matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is revealing their own limitations, not yours. The applause was thunderous now, echoing off the high ceilings, bouncing off the windows overlooking the park. People throughout the room were standing, and the gesture rippled outward until most of the ballroom was on their feet. The sound was overwhelming, humbling, more moving than I could have imagined. I saw Patricia wiping her eyes again, Robert clapping with his hands raised high, his face beaming with pride and vindication. But more importantly, I saw young women at tables throughout the room, their faces bright with emotion, their expressions a mixture of hope and recognition. One in particular, a black woman in her 20s, wearing glasses and a navy dress, was crying openly, her hands pressed to her chest as if trying to hold something precious inside. Next to her, an Asian woman was nodding emphatically, her own eyes wet with tears. At a table near the back, a plus-size woman in a beautiful purple gown was staring at me with an expression of such gratitude and relief that it nearly undid my composure entirely. These were the people I was really talking to. Not the executives who already had power, not the established names who'd never doubted their place in the industry, but the ones who were still fighting, still proving, still pushing against doors that should have been open all along. I nodded my thanks, not trusting myself to say anything more without breaking down completely. The emotion in the room was palpable, thick enough to touch. I picked up the crystal award, feeling its weight in my hands, and stepped away from the microphone. The MC met me with a warm hug that surprised me with its genuine affection. "That was remarkable," he whispered in my ear. "Truly remarkable." As I walked back to my table, the applause still thundering around me, people reached out to touch my arm or whisper congratulations. Hands patted my shoulder, voices said thank you, and that was beautiful, and you're amazing. The walk that had felt so long on the way up took only seconds on the way back, carried on a wave of support and affirmation. Patricia pulled me into a tight hug the moment I reached the table, holding on like I'd just saved her life. "That was powerful," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely powerful. You gave voice to something so many of us have felt but couldn't articulate. You've made quite an impression," Robert added, his eyes twinkling with pride and something else. Perhaps vindication. "Though I suspect you've been making impressions like that for years. Now everyone else just gets to know what some of us have known all along." As people congratulated me and asked questions about my work, about the books I'd acquired and the authors I'd championed, I noticed the table next to ours had emptied significantly. The redhead and brunette were gone, along with most of their companions. Only one woman remained, an older executive I recognized from industry events but had never formally met. She caught my eye and raised her glass in a subtle toast, her expression one of respect and perhaps apology for her former tablemates, before turning back to her conversation with someone from another table. The evening continued, more awards presented, more speeches delivered. But the energy had shifted fundamentally. People kept glancing at me, smiling, nodding. During the break before the final awards, I was surrounded by well-wishers, by people wanting to talk about diversifying their lists, by young professionals asking for advice. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone to process what had just happened, to let the reality sink in without an audience. The hallway was quieter, decorated with modern art and soft lighting that felt like a relief after the brightness of the ballroom. I found the women's lounge, a luxurious space with velvet chairs and a wall of mirrors surrounded by warm bulbs that made everyone look like movie stars. I was alone at first, studying my reflection and trying to reconcile this version of myself with the woman who'd walked in earlier tonight, anxious and uncertain, bracing herself for judgment. The face looking back at me was the same, but something fundamental had shifted. Not in my appearance, never in my appearance, but in how I saw myself in this space, in this industry, in this life I'd built despite every obstacle. The door opened and I tensed instinctively, but it was the young woman in navy I'd noticed during my speech, the one who'd been crying. Up close, I could see she was probably 24 or 25, with warm brown skin, natural curls pulled back in an elegant twist, and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said quickly, her voice shaking slightly with nervousness and residual emotion. I had to tell you. What you said up there, it meant everything to me. Everything." I turned to face her fully, giving her my complete attention. "What's your name?" "Jennifer. Jennifer Torres. I'm an assistant editor at Crescent Bay Press. It's my first year at this event." She laughed nervously, the sound catching in her throat. "I almost didn't come tonight. I told myself I didn't belong here, that everyone would wonder why I was taking up space. I almost called in sick this morning. Can you believe that? Made up some excuse about the flu, but my mentor insisted I come, practically dragged me here." My chest tightened with recognition, with the familiar weight of knowing exactly how she felt. I know that feeling. I know it very well. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong somewhere, only to realize you had every right to be there? Share your experience in the comments. When you walked to that stage, Jennifer continued, her words coming faster now, like she'd been holding them in and couldn't contain them anymore. And I realized you were the Sarah Mitchell, the one who acquired the Chapman trilogy and the Morrison memoirs and the Chen immigration saga and all these incredible books I admire. Books that changed how I thought about publishing, about what was possible. She wiped her eyes, smudging her mascara slightly. And then you gave that speech, talking about being judged and working twice as hard and still belonging. I'm sorry, I'm being ridiculous. You're not being ridiculous at all. I stepped closer, my voice gentle but firm. Can I tell you something? Every time I walk into a room like this, part of me still feels like that girl reading under the covers, afraid someone will tell her to turn off the light and go to sleep. Part of me still expects someone to say I made a mistake, that I'm not supposed to be here, that I should leave before I embarrass myself. That feeling doesn't completely go away, even after 15 years and a shelf full of bestsellers. Even standing on that stage accepting that award, part of me was waiting for someone to say there'd been a mistake. Jennifer looked at me with wide eyes, surprise and relief mixing in her expression. Really? But you seem so confident, so certain of your place. That's what people see, what I've learned to project. But inside? I shook my head. Inside, I'm still fighting those voices that tell me I don't belong. The difference now is that I don't let them win. I don't let them stop me from showing up, from doing the work, from taking up space. She nodded slowly, absorbing my words like they were water, and she'd been dying of thirst. What changes over time isn't the feeling itself, I continued, wanting her to really understand this. It's how you respond to it. You learn that the discomfort of showing up is worth it. You learn that your voice and your perspective and your instincts have value. You learn that the people who make you feel like you don't belong are revealing their own insecurities and limitations, not yours. How do you do that? How do you keep showing up when it's so hard? I thought about her question, wanting to give her something real and useful, not platitudes or easy answers. You remember why you're there. For me, it's the stories. It's knowing that there's some kid out there, maybe reading under the covers right now, who needs to see themselves in a book, who needs to know their life and their struggles and their joy matter enough to be the center of a story. Every time I want to give up, every time I walk into a room and feel that wave of judgment, I think about that kid. I think about the authors whose voices deserve to be heard. And I remember that my discomfort is a small price to pay for making space for their stories. Jennifer's eyes were wet again, but she was smiling now. I want to do that. I want to champion voices that matter, stories that change things. Then keep showing up, I said firmly. Keep doing the work. Keep believing in the stories that move you, even when other people don't see their value yet. Keep taking up space unapologetically. That's how you belong, by refusing to let anyone else define your worth, by deciding that you have just as much right to be in the room as anyone else, and acting like it even when you don't feel it. She nodded, wiping her eyes one last time. Thank you. Really, truly, thank you. I won't forget this. Neither will I said honestly, because talking to her, seeing my younger self in her nervousness and her passion, reminded me why all of this mattered, why the discomfort was worth it. After she left, I stayed a moment longer, looking at my reflection again. The woman staring back at me was the same one who'd walked in earlier, but something had fundamentally shifted. Not in my appearance, never in my appearance, but in how I saw myself in this space, in this industry, in this role I'd fought so hard to claim. I belonged here. I always had. The truth was, people like Olivia and Diana, the redhead and brunette who'd spent the evening judging me, they were relics of an industry that was evolving past them. Their power came from gatekeeping, from deciding who was worthy and who wasn't, based on the most superficial criteria. But the world was changing. Readers were demanding more diverse stories, more authentic voices. The old guards who couldn't adapt were becoming increasingly irrelevant. And I was part of that change, not just witnessing it, but actively creating it. When I returned to the ballroom, the energy had completely transformed from when I'd left. More people approached me now, wanting to introduce themselves, to talk about their work, to ask about mine. Publishing executives I'd never met wanted to discuss potential collaborations. Literary agents sought advice on pitching to Hartwell. Young professionals, people like Jennifer, asked how I'd built my career, what wisdom I could share. I answered their questions as honestly as I could, aware that every interaction was being observed, that my behavior tonight would be remembered and discussed long after the event ended. In this industry, reputation was everything, and tonight I'd staked mine on authenticity and principle. I'd stood on that stage and said things that needed to be said, regardless of how they were received. As the final awards were presented, Robert leaned over to me, his expression pleased and slightly mischievous. "You've caused quite a stir, you know." "I noticed some people left," he chuckled, the sound warm and satisfied. "Good riddance, frankly. Olivia Carson and Diana Webb. They've been fixtures at these events for years, but their influence has been waning for some time. Diana's company lost 3 major clients last quarter, including 2 of their biggest best-selling authors who left for publishers with more diverse lists. And Olivia's agency hasn't signed a significant new author in 2 years. The industry is moving on, and they're being left behind because they refused to evolve." I processed this information, putting names to the faces that had spent the evening judging me. "I've never worked with either of them." "Consider yourself fortunate," Robert said, his tone becoming more serious. "They're known for being extraordinarily selective about who they deem worthy of their attention, usually based on the most superficial criteria imaginable, criteria that have nothing to do with talent or potential. I've seen them dismiss brilliant authors and savvy editors simply because they didn't fit some outdated image of what publishing professionals should look like." He paused to take a sip of his wine. "I heard Diana complaining to the event organizer earlier, actually. She was quite insistent, demanding to know how you'd been invited, suggesting there must have been some mistake or oversight. Her tone suggested she thought you were here by accident or as some kind of diversity token." My stomach tightened at the thought, even though I'd suspected something like this. "And what did the organizer say?" "That you were not only invited, but specifically requested to attend, because Hartwell's work under your leadership has been transformative for the industry. That your track record speaks for itself. That you've discovered and championed more commercial and critical successes in the past 3 years than most acquisitions directors manage in a decade." Robert smiled, clearly enjoying recounting this. "Diana left shortly after, looking absolutely furious. I suspect she'll be even more displeased when she learns about the deal I'm about to propose to you." "Deal?" We spent the next 20 minutes discussing a potential partnership on a debut novel by a Vietnamese-American author exploring intergenerational trauma and cultural identity through the lens of a family-run restaurant in San Francisco. It was exactly the kind of story I loved, nuanced and necessary, full of specificity that somehow made it universal. The food descriptions alone were worth the price of admission, but underneath was this profound exploration of what it means to carry family history while forging your own path. Robert's enthusiasm matched my own, and we talked through marketing angles, potential comp titles, and the best timing for release. This was what I loved about my job, these moments when a great story found the right champion, when all the pieces aligned to give a book its best chance at finding its audience. As the evening wound down and guests began filtering toward the exits, exchanging final business cards and promising to follow up on conversations, I gathered my things and prepared to leave. Patricia exchanged contact information with me, promising to send over detailed information about her publicity team's podcast initiative. Several other people stopped by to say goodbye and congratulate me again on the award, to thank me for my speech, to express hope that we might work together in the future. I was nearly to the door, my coat retrieved from the check, when a voice called out behind me. The tone was commanding, used to being heard and obeyed. "Ms. Mitchell?" I turned to find a woman in her 50s, elegant in a silver gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary, approaching with purposeful strides. Her posture was perfect, her bearing aristocratic, but her expression was serious rather than cold. There was intelligence in her eyes and something else, an intensity of purpose that made me pay attention. Yes, I'm Margaret Hartwell. The name hit me like a physical impact. Margaret Hartwell, daughter of the company's founder, current chair of the board, owner of a significant percentage of company stock. My direct superior's superior's superior. The person who ultimately decided the direction and strategy of one of the largest media companies in the world. We'd never met in person, though I'd seen her in corporate videos and company newsletters, usually giving speeches about quarterly results or strategic initiatives. Miss Hartwell, I managed, my nervousness returning in a rush. It's an honor to meet you. The honor is mine, Sarah. She studied me with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. I wanted to tell you personally how moved I was by your speech tonight. You articulated something I've been thinking about for a long time, but couldn't quite put into words, or perhaps didn't have the courage to say out loud in a room full of people who might not want to hear it. I wasn't sure what to say, so I simply listened, giving her space to continue. You know, my father built this company on the belief that great stories could change the world, she said, her voice carrying the weight of memory and legacy. He used to say that books were the closest thing we had to magic, that they could transport us across time and space, make us live other lives, see through other eyes. He believed that publishing wasn't just a business, it was a responsibility to truth, to art, to the full spectrum of human experience. She paused, her expression becoming somewhat sad. But somewhere along the way, I think we forgot that. Or maybe we never fully embraced it. We got comfortable. We published the same kinds of stories from the same kinds of people, calling it commercial wisdom, when really it was just fear and laziness. We told ourselves we were giving readers what they wanted, when actually we were limiting what they could discover. We forgot that great stories come from all kinds of people, not just the ones who look like the people making the decisions. What would you do in Sarah's position? How would you handle people who judge you before knowing you? Let me know in the comments. Margaret's words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Around us, the last guests were filtering out, saying their goodbyes, but we stood in our own bubble of intensity and possibility. I'd like to set up a meeting with you next week, Margaret continued, her tone becoming more businesslike but no less intense. There's a new initiative I'm developing, something that could fundamentally change how we approach content acquisition and development. And I think you're exactly the person to lead it. It would mean a significant expansion of your role, your influence within the company, and your ability to shape what stories we tell and how we tell them. My heart skipped, hope and disbelief warring in my chest. I'd be very interested in hearing more. Excellent. My assistant will reach out to schedule something. She extended her hand, and I shook it, her grip firm and confident. The handshake of someone who'd spent decades negotiating with powerful people and never backing down. You made us all proud tonight, Sarah. Not just your colleagues at Hartwell, but everyone in this industry who believes it should be better than it has been. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep pushing us to be better. As she walked away, I stood in the lobby of the Rosewood Hotel, coat draped over one arm, crystal award clutched in the other hand, trying to absorb everything that had happened. I'd come here tonight expecting to be sidelined, to be judged and found wanting, to spend the evening proving I deserved to be in the room. Instead, I'd been recognized with one of the industry's highest honors, delivered a speech that moved people to tears, connected with young professionals who needed to see someone like them succeeding, and been offered an opportunity that could change the trajectory of my entire career. It felt surreal, like I might wake up at any moment and discover this had all been a dream. Outside, the New York night was cool and clear, the kind of perfect autumn evening that makes the city feel magical. I declined the valet service, deciding to walk for a while, needing the movement and fresh air to process my thoughts. The streets were still busy with theater-goers and diners spilling out of restaurants, their laughter and conversation creating a symphony of city life that I usually found comforting. My phone buzzed in my purse as I walked, the streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. I pulled it out to find a text from Jennifer, the young editor I'd met in the restroom. "Thank you again for tonight. You reminded me why I got into this business. You reminded me that my voice matters, that I don't have to shrink myself to succeed. I won't forget it. Ever. Warmth spread through my chest, pushing back against the cool night air. I stopped under a streetlight to type a response, my fingers slightly clumsy on the small screen. Thank you for reminding me too. Sometimes we need to see our younger selves in someone else to remember why we started fighting in the first place. Keep showing up, Jennifer. Keep taking up space. The industry needs your voice more than you know. I hit send and continued walking, my heels clicking against the pavement in a steady rhythm. As I walked, I thought about all the events I'd attended over the years, stretching back to that first industry conference when I was 23 and terrified. All the times I'd felt out of place or unwelcome, when I'd walked into rooms and immediately felt the weight of judgment, the subtle and not so subtle messages that I didn't belong. I thought about the comments and the stares, the casual cruelties disguised as concern or advice, the overt discrimination that people somehow felt entitled to express. They'd hurt every single time. Each comment was a small cut, each dismissive glance a tiny wound. Over time they'd accumulated, creating scar tissue that made me tougher but also made me tired. There were nights I'd gone home and cried, days I'd seriously considered leaving the industry entirely, moments when I'd wondered if it was worth fighting so hard just to exist in a space that didn't want me there. But tonight had proven something important, something I'd always intellectually understood, but hadn't fully felt until I stood on that stage accepting that award. Belonging wasn't about being accepted by people like Olivia Carson and Diana Webb. It wasn't about fitting into someone else's narrow definition of what success looked like, what a publishing professional should be. Belonging was about knowing your worth, doing work that mattered, creating value that couldn't be denied. It was about refusing to shrink yourself to make others comfortable, about taking up space unapologetically. I'd spent so much energy over the years trying to prove I deserved to be in certain rooms, collecting credentials and accomplishments like armor against judgment. But the truth was simpler and more powerful than I'd realized. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. My work spoke for itself. The authors I'd championed, the stories I'd brought to readers, the voices I'd amplified when others wanted to silence them, those were my credentials. Those were my belonging. The Chapman trilogy that had been rejected 11 times before landing on my desk. It had sold over 2 million copies, been translated into 37 languages, and was currently being adapted into a prestige streaming series with an A-list cast. The Morrison memoirs that publishers said were too regional and wouldn't interest mainstream readers? #1 on the New York Times list for 16 consecutive weeks. The Chen immigration saga that was deemed too political? Winner of 3 major literary awards and required reading in dozens of university courses. I hadn't succeeded, despite my appearance or identity. I'd succeeded because of my instincts, my work ethic, my willingness to take risks on stories that mattered. And yes, perhaps because my experiences as someone who didn't fit the traditional publishing mold had given me insight into what stories were being overlooked, what voices were being silenced. My phone buzzed again as I approached the subway entrance near Columbus Circle. This time it was a group text from several people I'd met tonight, including Patricia and Robert, discussing potentially organizing a quarterly dinner for industry professionals interested in diversifying their lists. Robert had already suggested a French restaurant in the West Village, and Patricia was offering to create a mailing list. I smiled and typed a quick response agreeing to participate, then descended into the subway, the noise and energy of the station a stark contrast to the elegant quiet of the Rosewood Hotel. On the train back to my apartment in Brooklyn, I sat with the Crystal Award on my lap, watching the familiar stations flash by, thinking about what would happen next. The following Monday arrived faster than I expected, anticipation making the weekend feel both endless and too short. I spent Saturday researching potential hires for the new division, making lists of editors and agents whose work I admired, thinking about structure and strategy. Sunday, I'd gone to my favorite coffee shop in Park Slope and sketched out vision statements and mission objectives, trying to articulate what I wanted this initiative to become. Now I sat in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the Hartwell Media Group headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a stunning view of Manhattan's skyline, stretching out in all directions. Margaret Hartwell sat across from me, along with two other executives I recognized from company meetings, Carol Patterson, the CFO, and Michael Chen, head of global strategy. "Sarah, thank you for coming," Margaret began without preamble. She was the kind of person who didn't waste time on small talk when there was important work to be done. "I'll get straight to the point. We want to create a new division within Hartwell focused specifically on amplifying diverse voices and underrepresented stories, not as a side project or a token gesture, not as something we trot out during Diversity Awareness Month and ignore the rest of the year, but as a core part of our business strategy moving forward." She slid a thick folder across the polished conference table. I opened it to find organizational charts, detailed budget projections, market research data, and a mission statement that aligned almost perfectly with everything I'd scribbled in my notebook over the weekend. "We want you to lead it," Margaret continued, watching my face as I absorbed the information. "You'd have full autonomy over acquisitions, a dedicated team of your own choosing, and a budget that reflects the importance we're placing on this initiative. The position is Senior Vice President of Inclusive Content Strategy." I looked up from the folder, the title echoing in my head. Senior Vice President. It was a position typically reserved for people with 25 or 30 years of experience, people who'd paid their dues and slowly climbed every rung of the corporate ladder. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, my voice slightly breathless. "Say yes," Carol Patterson interjected with a warm smile. She was a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and sharp eyes that reminded me of my favorite professor in college. "We've needed someone with your vision and courage for a long time, Sarah. Your speech at the gala crystallized something we've all been dancing around in board meetings and strategy sessions. It's time to stop talking about diversity and inclusion as abstract goals and actually invest in them meaningfully." Michael Chen nodded his agreement. "The market research supports this too. Reader demographics are changing rapidly. Younger audiences in particular are demanding more authentic, diverse stories. Publishers who adapt will thrive. Those who don't will become increasingly irrelevant. This isn't just the right thing to do morally, it's smart business." Over the next hour, we discussed the specifics in detail that made my head spin with possibility. I'd be able to hire my own team, selecting editors, agents, and cultural consultants who shared the vision. We'd develop new imprints under the Hartwell umbrella, each focused on specific communities and perspectives. I'd create partnerships with organizations that supported emerging writers from marginalized communities, funding scholarships and mentorship programs. The budget was substantial, 8 figures, a clear signal that this wasn't a PR move, but a genuine commitment to change. "There's one more thing," Margaret said as the meeting concluded, her expression becoming more serious. "I heard about what happened with Olivia Carson and Diana Webb at the gala." I tensed slightly, wondering if this would somehow become an issue, if my confrontational speech would be seen as unprofessional or divisive. "I want you to know that their behavior was completely unacceptable, and it's been addressed," Margaret continued firmly. "Diana's company lost their contract with us this morning. We've decided to move in a different direction for our West Coast operations, partnering instead with a smaller firm that's been doing innovative work with diverse authors. And Olivia's agency will no longer be on our preferred vendor list." The weight of her words settled over me. This was more than just personal vindication. This was institutional change, the kind that rippled outward and created space for others to follow. "Excellence matters, Sarah," Margaret said, standing and extending her hand again. "But so does character. We can't claim to value inclusion and diversity while working with people who actively undermine it. Actions have to match words, or the words mean nothing." I accepted the position that day, and within 2 weeks I'd assembled a dream team. 6 editors with diverse backgrounds and impeccable track records. 3 literary agents who specialized in representing underrepresented voices. Cultural consultants from Indigenous, Latinx, Asian American, and Black communities. A marketing director who'd successfully launched viral campaigns for independent publishers. An operations manager who could turn vision into practical reality. We launched with a slate of 12 acquisitions that represented voices from communities systematically excluded from mainstream publishing. Indigenous authors exploring contemporary reservation life. LGBTQ+ writers telling stories beyond coming-out narratives. Disabled authors whose perspectives had been filtered through abled narrators for too long. Immigrant storytellers whose experiences defied simplistic stereotypes. Each book was chosen not because it checked some diversity box, but because it was brilliant, because it told a story that needed to be told, because it would make readers think and feel and see the world differently. 3 months after the gala, I received an email from Jennifer Torres that made me stop in the middle of reviewing a manuscript to read it twice. She'd been promoted to associate editor at her publishing house, the youngest person ever to hold that position at Crescent Bay Press. And she'd just acquired her first book, a young adult novel about a Latina teenager navigating her identity in suburban America while helping her grandmother's traditional bakery survive gentrification. The premise was commercial and meaningful, exactly the kind of debut that could launch a career. Her email was effusive with gratitude, thanking me again for that night, for showing her what was possible, for giving her the courage to pitch the book to her editorial board, even when she'd been nervous they'd reject it as too niche. I forwarded her email to Margaret with a simple message. This is why it matters. This is what happens when we make space for new voices. They create space for others. Margaret's response came within minutes. Exactly. And this is just the beginning. She was right. 6 months after that night at the Rosewood Hotel, our new division released its first list of titles. The response exceeded every projection we'd made, even our most optimistic scenarios. Readers were hungry for these stories, starving for them actually, and they showed up in numbers that proved what I'd always known. There was no such thing as a niche audience, only audiences that had been ignored, dismissed, and underestimated. Our first list included stories that immediately resonated with readers who'd been waiting their entire lives to see themselves reflected in literature. A memoir by a deaf activist about building community and fighting for accessibility. A thriller featuring a Native American FBI agent tracking a serial killer on indigenous land, written by an enrolled tribal member who brought authenticity to every detail. A romance between two immigrant women building a life together while navigating their families' expectations. A science fiction novel by a wheelchair user imagining a future where disability was centered rather than erased. The sales figures were remarkable, but the reader responses were even more powerful. Social media exploded with people sharing how these books made them feel seen, understood, valued. Book clubs formed around these titles. Teachers added them to curricula. Libraries couldn't keep them on shelves. At a celebration dinner 6 months post-launch, Robert Harrison raised his glass in a toast, his face glowing with pride and vindication. To Sarah Mitchell, who refused to accept that she didn't belong, and in doing so, changed the entire landscape of our industry. Who proved that taking risks on authentic voices isn't just morally right, it's commercially brilliant. I clinked glasses with my team, looking around at the faces of people who'd taken a chance on this vision, who'd left secure positions to join something new and uncertain. Some of them had faced their own versions of that night at the Rosewood Hotel, their own moments of being told they didn't fit, that they should reconsider their career paths, that their perspectives didn't matter. Now we were building something together, creating a space where belonging wasn't about conforming, but about bringing your full self to the work. Later that evening, I stood alone for a moment on the restaurant's terrace, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the darkness. The air was warm, carrying the scent of summer flowers and distant rain. My phone buzzed, a notification from social media. Someone had posted a photo from the gala. The moment I'd accepted the award, my face caught in an expression of surprise and emotion. The caption read, "6 months ago, this woman gave a speech that changed my career. She reminded me that our voices matter, even when the world tries to silence them. She proved that taking up space isn't selfish, it's necessary." The post had hundreds of comments, people sharing their own stories of being dismissed or underestimated, of finding courage in my words to pursue their own dreams. A young writer said she'd finally submitted her manuscript after years of being too scared. An assistant editor said she'd pitched a risky acquisition that became a surprise bestseller. A literary agent said she'd started her own agency to represent voices being ignored by established firms. I scrolled through the comments, each one a reminder of why the discomfort of that night had been worth it, why every difficult moment of my career had led to something meaningful. I thought about Olivia and Diana, the redhead and brunette who'd spent that evening judging me, whispering about me, trying to make me feel like I didn't belong. They'd judged me based solely on my appearance, never bothering to learn who I was or what I'd accomplished. They'd assumed that someone who looked like me couldn't possibly have earned a place at that table, couldn't possibly have anything valuable to contribute. Their prejudice had been their limitation, not mine. In trying to exclude me, they'd revealed their own irrelevance in an industry that was finally ready to evolve past them. Diana had lost not just the Hartwell contract, but 2 other major clients who'd publicly stated they wanted to work with publishers committed to diversity. Olivia's agency was hemorrhaging authors to younger, more progressive firms. The old guard was crumbling, and new voices were rising to take their place. I thought about all the Sarah Mitchells out there, the ones still reading under the covers with flashlights, dreaming of stories and wondering if they'd ever be allowed to tell them. The kids who didn't see themselves in books, who'd been taught that their experiences weren't universal enough, their perspectives too specific, their voices too different. I thought about the Jennifer Terezas, the young professionals who needed to see someone like them succeeding before they could believe it was possible. This was why it mattered, not just for me, but for everyone who came after. Every door I pushed open made it easier for the next person. Every story we published created space for others. Every voice we amplified made the chorus richer, truer, more complete. I picked up my phone and composed a post of my own, attaching a photo of my team at dinner, all of us laughing and celebrating together. To everyone who's been told they don't belong, you do. Your perspective is valuable, irreplaceable actually. Your voice is necessary, essential to making our culture complete. Your presence changes everything, opens doors, creates possibilities. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't shrink yourself to make others comfortable. Take up space. Tell your stories. Change the world. Within minutes, the responses flooded in like a tide I couldn't have anticipated. Stories from people who'd faced similar experiences, who'd been judged and dismissed and underestimated, but kept going anyway. Messages of gratitude from readers who'd finally seen themselves reflected in the books we'd published, who'd finally felt like they mattered. Notes from aspiring writers who were taking the risk to share their stories because they'd seen that there was space for them now, that the doors were opening. I stood on that terrace, reading message after message, feeling a profound sense of purpose settle into my bones. The award on my shelf at home was beautiful, a tangible recognition of my work. But this, the ripple effect of choosing authenticity over acceptance, of demanding space rather than asking for permission, of refusing to be diminished, this was the real recognition. This was the legacy I wanted to build. They'd said I didn't fit the event. They'd been wrong in every possible way. I didn't fit their narrow definition of who belonged in positions of power and influence. I didn't conform to their outdated ideas about what success looked like, what a publishing professional should be. I didn't shrink myself to make them comfortable, didn't apologize for taking up space, didn't pretend to be something I wasn't. And in refusing to fit their mold, I'd helped break it entirely, not just for myself, but for everyone who came after. The girl reading under the covers all those years ago, the one who fell in love with stories and dreamed of sharing them with the world, she would have been proud. She'd dreamed of changing the world through stories, of making sure every kid could see themselves as the hero of their own narrative. Now, standing in the middle of Manhattan, leading a team dedicated to amplifying voices that had been silenced for too long, creating pathways for storytellers who'd been told they didn't belong, I realized that's exactly what we were doing. One story at a time, one voice at a time, one person at a time who walked into a room and refused to believe they didn't belong. Because the truth is, we all belong. We always did. We just needed someone to say it out loud. Someone to stand up and take up space and refuse to be diminished. Someone to prove that the standards that had kept us out were arbitrary and outdated, that excellence came in forms the gatekeepers hadn't imagined. And now that the door was open, now that the path was visible, others could follow, would follow, were already following. That was the real victory. Not the award or the promotion or the recognition, as meaningful as those were. The real victory was knowing that my struggle had made someone else's journey easier, that my refusal to shrink had created space for others to expand, that my voice, raised in defense of belonging, had encouraged others to speak up too. I belonged. I always had. And so did everyone else who'd been told otherwise. Did Sarah's journey inspire you? What's the biggest lesson you're taking away from this story? And have you ever proven someone wrong just by being yourself? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it.